Morning fog rolled across the wide lawns of Whitlock Estate like a heavy veil, dulling the sharp edges of a world that had always obeyed clear rules. Duke Henry Whitlock stood at the tall window of his study, hands clasped behind his back, watching a carriage move slowly up the gravel drive. He did not feel excitement. He felt control. This day had been planned for months, arranged through letters, lawyers, and polite agreements. The woman arriving was to be his future wife, chosen not by chance or romance, but by logic. Marriage, to Henry, was a duty, not a desire. Henry Whitlock was 34 years old and one of the most powerful landowners in upstate New York. His estate stretched across fertile farmland and timber hills near the Hudson Valley. Would he had inherited everything 6 years earlier when his father died in a riding accident. Since then, Henry had ruled his world with precision. Every tenant paid on time. Every worker knew their place. Every day followed a structure that left no room for weakness or surprise. Order was his strength, and discipline was his shield. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a stillness that made others uneasy. His dark hair was always neatly kept. His gray eyes were sharp and observant, missing nothing. Society respected him, feared him, and often misunderstood him. Women admired him from a distance, but few truly knew him. He allowed no one close enough to disturb the balance he had built. The carriage slowed near the front steps. Henry straightened his coat and prepared himself. But Miss Rosalind Moore was described in letters as well-mannered, grateful, and agreeable. A quiet young woman from modest means, someone who would accept the safety he offered and fit neatly into the life he had designed. She would manage the household, host polite gatherings, and give him heirs. Nothing more was required. Nothing more was expected. The carriage stopped. The door opened. And in that moment, everything Henry believed began to crack. Rosalind Moore stepped down onto the gravel with a confidence that did not belong to a timid woman. She moved as if the land already knew her. Her dark hair escaped its pins in loose curls that caught the pale morning light. Her eyes were a striking shade of violet, alert and unafraid. She did not look at the estate with awe. She studied it with interest. Henry felt an unfamiliar tension settle in his chest. She walked up the steps without hesitation, her posture straight, her gaze direct. This was not the woman described in letters. This was not someone who would quietly follow instructions. "Your Grace," she said, stopping before him. "I am Rosalind Moore. I believe you were expecting me." Her voice was calm and steady, with warmth but no submission. Henry paused, something he rarely did. "Welcome to Whitlock Estate, Miss Moore. I trust your journey was acceptable." "Acceptable, yes, though your roads could use improvement," she replied easily. "Several deep ruts nearly sent the carriage sideways. A man of your influence could surely see that repaired." Henry stared at her. No woman had ever spoken to him that way on first meeting. Not once. "I will see to it," he said at last. She smiled, not apologetic, but satisfied. "Perhaps you would like to rest after your journey," he added. "The housekeeper can show you to your rooms. I would prefer to see the grounds first," Rosalind said, already turning toward the gardens. "You can tell a great deal about a person by how they care for their land." Henry opened his mouth to object. She was already walking away. He followed. What began as a polite tour quickly became something else entirely. Rosalind observed everything. She knelt to examine soil, touched leaves, and asked questions that no guest had ever asked. She commented freely, not to impress, but because she genuinely cared. "Your apple trees are planted too close together," she said. brushing dirt from her gloves. They are competing for nutrients. Spacing them wider would increase yield. Henry stiffened. I leave such matters to my foreman. A landowner should understand his land, she replied calmly. Delegation is useful, but ignorance is costly. The word struck deeper than he expected. At the stables, her behavior became even more unsettling. She approached the horses with confidence, checking their legs, teeth, and posture. The stable hands watched her in stunned silence. This mare favors her left leg, Rosalind said. When was she last seen by the farrier? The head groom hesitated, then answered. 3 weeks ago, miss. She is compensating for pain. It is subtle, but it is there. Henry watched as the groom examined the horse again and slowly nodded. We will look into it, Your Grace. Henry said nothing. His control felt thinner now. Where did you learn this? He asked as they walked back toward the house. My father raised horses in Kentucky, Rosalind said. I spent more time in stables than parlors. Your guardian approved of that. No, she said with a small smile. He disapproved of most things I enjoyed. She stopped and turned to face him. I should be honest with you, Mr. Whitlock. I am not easily shaped. I speak my mind. I ask questions. I do not believe silence is a virtue. Henry met her gaze. And you believe such traits suit marriage? I believe marriage should be a partnership, she said, not a hierarchy. The word unsettled him. Tea that afternoon became a quiet battle of ideas. Rosalind spoke openly about land reform, tenant welfare, and education. She challenged his views without hostility, but without fear. She listened, but she did not retreat. You manage efficiently, she said, but do you know your tenants by name? Oh, Henry hesitated. Reports are not people, she added gently. Numbers do not raise children or bury the dead. Something inside him shifted. When evening came, he realized something frightening. He was not bored. He was awake. That night, Henry stood alone in his study long after the house had gone quiet. The woman staying under his roof was nothing like the wife he had planned for. She was intelligent, bold, and impossible to ignore. She represented disruption, challenge, and change. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Henry Whitlock wondered if order alone had been a kind of prison. Outside, the fog lifted slowly from the estate. Inside, something far more dangerous had begun. Henry woke before dawn, the events of the previous day pressing against his thoughts with an insistence he could not ignore. That he had slept poorly, his dreams filled with violet eyes and unanswered questions. For years, his mornings had followed the same pattern. Rise early, review reports, walk the grounds, control the day before it controlled him. But this morning felt different. The house felt different. There was a new presence within its walls, one that disturbed the silence he had always valued. When he entered the breakfast room, Rosalind was already there. She sat near the window, sunlight catching in her dark hair, a book open before her. She looked up as he entered, her expression warm and unguarded. "Good morning," she said. "I hope I did not take your favorite seat." Henry paused. "I do not have a favorite seat." She smiled as if she found that both amusing and sad. "You should," she said lightly. "Everyone should have at least one small indulgence." And he took a seat across from her. "You rise early." "Old habit," she replied. "There is something honest about the morning, before the world begins pretending." Henry studied her over the rim of his cup. "And what do you intend to do with this honest morning?" "Visit the tenant farms," she said without hesitation. "I would like to see how people truly live here." He frowned slightly. "That is not customary. Neither is judging an estate without understanding it, she said calmly. He exhaled. Very well. We will go after breakfast. The farms lay beyond the manicured fields, where the land grew rougher and the houses simpler. Henry had ridden past them countless times, but he had rarely stopped. Today he did. Rosalind spoke with the families as if she had known them for years. She listened. She asked about crops, children, illness, and worries. She noticed broken fences and leaking roofs. She remembered names. Henry watched quietly. Mrs. Patterson, one woman said shyly, showing Rosalind her small vegetable garden. You should sell the extra produce in town, Rosalind suggested. It would bring income. The woman hesitated. The journey is long, and I cannot leave the children. Then perhaps a weekly market here, Rosalind said, glancing at Henry. Henry nodded slowly. We could arrange transport. The woman's eyes filled with disbelief and gratitude. As they rode on, Henry felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. I did not know, he admitted. You could not, Rosalind replied. You were not looking. The village school stood at the edge of the road, its roof sagging, its windows cracked. Inside, a single teacher struggled to manage children of all ages. Rosalind knelt beside a small boy, struggling to read. You are doing well, she told him gently. You just need time. Henry felt shame for the first time in many years. This is not acceptable, he said quietly. It can be changed, Rosalind replied, if you wish it. That evening, they spoke long into the night, about responsibility, about power, about what it meant to lead. You were raised to rule, Rosalind said, not to connect, but the two do not have to be separate. Henry listened. He had never truly listened before. On the third day, she worked in the kitchen garden beside the cook, offering advice, laughing easily. The servants watched her with curiosity, then affection. She does not act above us, Mrs. Crawford whispered. She acts with us. Henry reopened the still room that day. It had been locked since his mother's death. Dust lay thick on the shelves. Rosalind stepped inside with reverence. She taught me everything, Henry said quietly. Then let her work continue, Rosalind replied. By the end of the week, Henry no longer felt like the same man. On the seventh evening, they stood together in the drawing room. I will return to my guardian tomorrow, Rosalind said softly. Henry felt panic rise. Stay, he said. She met his eyes. Not as a guest, as your wife. Only if you choose me freely. Henry dropped to one knee. Not out of duty, he said. Not out of expectation, but because you have shown me a better way to live. Tears filled her eyes. Yes, she whispered. And in that quiet room, a new life began. The wedding took place on a clear autumn morning when the trees around Whitlock Estate burned with shades of gold and red. It was not the grand society event many had expected. There were no crowds from distant cities, no endless procession of titled guests. Instead, the chapel was filled with people who mattered. Tenants, teachers, stable hands, village families, people whose lives had already begun to change. Henry stood at the altar, his posture steady, yet his hands trembled slightly. He did not hide it. For the first time in his life, he was not stepping into a role defined by duty alone. He was choosing. When Rosalind entered, the room seemed to draw breath. Yet she wore a simple gown, elegant but unadorned. Her hair was pinned back, though a few curls escaped as always. She walked with calm confidence, her eyes fixed on Henry. This was not a woman being given away. This was a woman walking toward her future. Their vows were spoken softly, but every word carried weight. When Henry promised partnership, it was not ceremonial language. When Rosalind promised loyalty, it was not submission. They were choosing each other with open eyes. As they left the chapel hand in hand, the villagers cheered, not because a duke had married, but because something hopeful had begun. Marriage did not soften Rosalind. It sharpened her purpose. Within weeks, changes rippled across the estate. Henry found himself working beside his wife rather than ahead of her. Decisions were no longer made behind closed doors, but through long conversations at shared desks and late evening walks. The school roof was repaired before winter. New books arrived. A second teacher was hired. Children who had once labored endlessly in fields now spent mornings learning and afternoons helping their families with pride instead of exhaustion. Rosalind oversaw the still room with care and respect. Women gathered there weekly, learning to prepare remedies, preserve herbs, and care for their families. Knowledge spread quietly, powerfully. Henry watched it all with awe. "You have changed everything," he told her one evening. She shook her head. "We have. Not everyone approved." Lord Patten arrived in early winter, his disapproval as sharp as the cold wind. He walked through the manor with tight lips and sharper words. "A duchess does not soil her hands," he said. "This is not proper." Rosalind met his gaze calmly. "Proper according to whom?" "You are inviting criticism," he warned Henry. "This estate is becoming a spectacle." Henry did not raise his voice. It no longer needed to be raised. "If caring for people is a spectacle," he said, "then I accept it." The argument ended there. Spring brought visitors, reformers, writers, curious landowners. Some came to mock. Others came to learn. Rosalind welcomed them all with the same calm confidence. Henry stood beside her, no longer the distant duke, but a leader present among his people. One evening, as they walked the fields at sunset, Rosalind rested her hand on her stomach. Henry stopped. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said softly. "Something is beginning." Joy struck him so suddenly he had to sit. A child. Their child. News spread quickly, and carried not by gossip, but by smiles. The village celebrated as if the child already belonged to them all. The months passed gently. Rosalind slowed, but did not stop. She taught seated when she could not stand long. Henry adjusted schedules without complaint. He learned patience, not as restraint, but as care. When the child was born, a daughter, the cry that filled the room was strong and clear. Henry wept openly. They named her Eleanor, not for legacy, but for hope. Years later, Whitlock Estate was no longer spoken of as rigid or distant. It was spoken of as alive. Henry no longer stood alone at his window watching the world from a distance. He stood among it. He listened. He learned. Rosalind never became quiet. She became influential. Together, they built something rare, a marriage rooted not in control, but in trust. Not in silence, but in shared voice. Henry had expected obedience. He had found partnership. And in that unexpected union, he discovered that true order was not built through dominance, but through understanding. The untamed woman had not broken his world. She had finally taught him how to live within it.